Hey, what is up? Dalton and Cloud here. Today we're going over the most important study material you could ever have for any certification. I'm just kidding. So something more important for, test day, more important than before you sit in there in that testing room or in your office getting ready to sit down and take that test. It's going to be the prep work you do before you take the test. This was actually something requested by one of you, the subscribers. This is going to be what to do. What are my tips for what to do before test day? What is going to help you make you the best version of yourself before you go into that exam to make it to where you set yourself up for success, not failure. But before we get into that, if you could go ahead and click over here, tap that subscribe button, and then hit the notification bell. What that does is it really helps out this channel, helps out for the YouTube algorithm, gets this video in front of more people, so more people can have these resources on what they need to do to be prepared for test day going into their certification. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. All right. So as you can see over here by my notes on this first notepad, it's going to be make a study plan. So, there's some resources out there. A lot of planners. I mean, even just using Google Calendar is going to be helpful. Um, there's a lot of good ways you could set up different reoccurring events. So if you work 8 to 5 and you're going to give yourself some decompression time, maybe 2 hours after you get off work and get home, because you're going to have a commute. A lot of people are going to have a commute still, um, unless you're someone who got the ability to work from home now. So great, good for you, if you are. But having something where you could sit down, make calendar, make up reoccurring events. Google Calendar is great for that, to where you always know, hey, I'm going to test or study for a certain amount of hours this week. Don't overload yourself either. So when you're going through and preparing your study segments, don't overload yourself to where you're not going to be able to retain anything. You're just going to try speeding through it. And then you remember maybe 25% of the study material. And guess what? You're only going to be able to pass 25% of the questions on the test. So make sure you pace yourself accordingly. And then also, when you're pacing yourself, make a deadline. But we're getting into that. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We just want to go over what tools we could use as far as creating a schedule. So Google Calendar is going to be great for that. Another Android app. So Google Calendar. I believe you could also find this on iOS. But AnyDo is another great app, and this is on Android as well. So AnyDo is really great. You could organize everything. You could create custom widgets. Same, you could set up reoccurring events, plan your day accordingly, just like you can with Google Calendar. You can make it to where you could kind of set out other distractions, because I know if you're using Google Calendar and you're using your primary email, you may get distracted with other emails or other notifications that come in, and maybe you want to kind of limit yourself away from those distractions. So having something like AnyDo could be a great alternative for that. Prioritizing different targets or color coding. So maybe at one part of the day, it's going to be read book for 30 minutes. Another part is going to be it's going to be go into and study course, right? Maybe you have a 30-second segment of information coming up for studying. So you're going to have that for another 30 minutes. And then you're going to have another 30-minute lab where you're actually going to have hands-on with the material. And then maybe the last 30 minutes of like 2 hours of studying, you're going to go through and you're going to review the notes you took on either, your virtual notepad or your physical notepad. So those are just some ways you could kind of go through with these different apps. Trello is another great app, and this is great specifically with teams. So let's say you're going to study for a test, but then you have someone else who's a study buddy. Could be in person, could be virtual, but someone who's going to study with you. Apps like Trello, and I believe I have Friday on here. Friday. So these are great productivity apps that will help you where you could, create your schedule, create reoccurring events, and just different ways to help you stay on task when you're creating your outline for what you want to do for your studies. Uh, so Trello and Friday are great, especially, you want to work with a team to keep on task. Those two specific apps are great for that. And for the iOS people, Awesome Calendar is a great alternative for Google Calendar. Has a lot of great a lot of the same functionality. You could set up recurring events. Can't talk anymore. You could set up a reminder. You could take notes as well. And then you could have your day-to-day review. I already mentioned the recurring updates. And then you could color code everything. You could create little stickers. So a lot of people love that just because there's a little bit more customization. You could set up kind of like to be, you could color code but you could also set up little, stickers, something creative to maybe it's another trigger for you, right? Just a picture of a test tube bottle, right? A little picture of a test tube bottle, just reminder that's going to be your lab coming up. Get you excited for that. And then Things 3. This is another app that's going to be helpful for keeping you on task when you're going through setting up your events, setting up your calendar, and different things such as that. Right? So that's all good there. All right, so that's it for Make a Study Plan. Those are some of the resources that I found that were going to be great and helpful and that were going to help us out. So we won't save that. We're done with that. So what's next on the chopping block? So study in bite-sized chunks. So I mentioned this before in multiple of my videos. One of the vendors that we keep coming back to is going to be called CBT Nuggets. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The reason I love the curriculum for CBT Nuggets is because they get you prepared to study for a test, but they don't give you a lot of information at once because they don't want you to be overloaded. Something I mentioned before. They want you to take it at a certain pace so that you could retain the information. So, as I said before earlier on in the video, and I told you we'd come back to this, when you're studying for a test, make sure you study in bite-sized pieces of information. We're going to go ahead a little bit. So, in this course, has how many hours overall? Let's go to the overview. So 26 hours worth of content on this course. I'm not going to study 4 hours a day. Yeah, that's going to be good, but it's not really going to help me any. So this first part is 6 minutes. That's whatever. This next part is 37 minutes, where 15 minutes for estimated time in lab. So that's good. That's a good chunk. This next bit, this is a better example. 2 hours, 18 minutes. And how much of it is going to be actually studying? That's probably going to be another 30, 45 minutes. And then an hour, hour and a half, hour and 45 or hour and 45 minutes in lab. So, study for 30 minutes, take a 30-minute lab, take a break, do another 30-minute lab, take another break, do the 45-minute lab, take a break, you're done for the night. Now that's fine, or you could kind of even change the pace up. Maybe study for 30 minutes, take one lab, wait next day, and then do the other two labs. And then, after you're done with the second lab, then you go through and you review your notes, make sure you remember the study material, like the actual definitions, everything else you need to know that you learned before. In that way, you're going to study in a bite-sized piece of information, but you're also going back, reminding yourself what you learned. And we'll go over some resources and tools on how to take notes or flashcards, something for your definitions. Um, so that's the second tip, which is study in bite-sized chunks. So the third tip, listen to the subject, read it, write it, and then read and write what you learned. So that brings us to this handy dandy, not notebook, but piece of information we have here. So listen to the subject, read it, write it, read and write what you learned. So the best way to read is going to be different e-readers out there, unless you prefer physical, which is fine. Physical notebooks are great. And there's even apps out there, because we said read it, listen to it, like watch it, and then write it. Um, there are great apps out there where you could actually scan a page, and then you could actually listen to what that page is saying. It's going to be a little bit more robotical or robotic. We haven't really gotten to the age of autonomous reading where it's, it sounds like a person is reading the book to you yet. But, we're probably only a year or two off from that technology with the way AI is moving, and you know artificial intelligence and just smart computing. But that's another topic for another time. Anyway, so you can read from your tablet, you can read from your phone. I do have a Kindle book. It's not this particular one, but I do like the way it feels. I get mine. I want it to feel like paper. So that was kind of like the one that I got, where it still feels like I'm reading a book, because I do like that aspect, is actually physically holding a book and reading it. In my opinion, this is like the uh, iPod of Amazon. This is kind of like their claim to fame, was the whole Kindle book, and that really took them over the top, which was great for them. But I love Kindle, not necessarily the book. You could get the book if you want, and that's great. And I'll have the link down below. But I love the Kindle app. They've gotten really great with the app, where if you do have an ebook, for example, if you're going for your Security Plus, and I have a video on that, and the author of the Security Plus book, he does an amazing job, and I'll bring that up real quick. Security Plus, and there he is, first one right there, Daryl Gibson, Get Certified, Get Ahead, and this is for the newer version, this SY0 TAC 601 study guide. I studied for the 501, so, but my resources are still going to be the same. Jason Dion and Daryl Gibson are going to be your best bets for this particular test. But, you can't beat $10 for a Kindle book, right? You could study on the actual Kindle tablet. You could study on your own tablet. You could study on your computer. You could get a e-reader for your computer. Whatever you want to do. But anyway, as I was saying, just the app itself, and you could get the app for iOS, for Android. It's it's amazing. You could highlight different sections, so then you could actually go back to the area you highlighted. You're like, oh, this looks like an important thing. Let me come back to this. And then that's why I do prefer these e-readers and the way the technology's moved that way. But listening to the subject, reading the subject, writing the subject. So again, remember, you have your productivity apps where you have, your Google Calendar and all the other Android apps and things like that, where you could write notes on the calendar day on where you had an update, and then you could have little notes on there on what you learned. You could have what pages you read in your book. You could highlight that, and then you go back to the highlighted areas in the pages you went through, and you're like, okay, this is the section I was going through for this, or this is, in exams we talk about domains, right? Different domains. So domain 1, domain 2, domain 3, you're like, okay, so this was for domain 1, and the certain subject was this. Okay, cool. So this is what I had to go back and review these topics again if you do a practice test and you think you didn't do great on a certain area. So subject, read, write, and then for writing, there you can, write down the notes, and there's other apps out there as well. For example, if you have like uh, Microsoft Office, OneNote is great to use, and there's other apps out there as well. So that's the third study tip that I have for everyone. So the fourth study tip is write down definitions to review. So, you know, any definition that you think is going to be important, which all definitions are to an extent, you want to write it down so that you remember it. And then the best way to remember definitions, because a lot of them are going to be droll and boring, is going to be flashcards. So there are a lot of great flashcards apps out there. Don't get me wrong, but I only wanted to find two because I don't want to overload anyone. This isn't like, you're not studying for a test. I'm not going to test you on the different flashcard apps out there. The two that I trust the most, just because of tenure, well, I'm less about Anki app, but more about Quizlet. So Quizlet has been around, I don't know, gosh, since when I started college, or before that probably. And they've been around for a while. I've used their flashcard app. I've made decks with it. I'm pretty sure Linux Academy probably used some version of Quizlet from when I was looking at it. And just in general, I love the way they let you create decks and study with this app. It's really easy to use. It's very functional on multiple platforms. They have the audio for this term. They go above and beyond with this particular application. So I honestly give the golden star of the day to Quizlet. I do gotta say I've seen a lot from Anki app, which I believe this is also for Android and iOS. Don't quote me on this, iOS users, but I do know it is for Android. But Anki app is something I've seen a lot of people who are studying for different tests use and give raving reviews about. So go ahead and check this out. Get the materials, create your flashcards, create your decks. You could add pictures to the decks. You could do multiple choice kind of, and then you could also just see your progress on how you think how you're doing for your different decks. So it's like maybe you have your deck set up into different domains and you have definitions for each domain, and then you could go through, study each one, and you're like, okay, I didn't do great on these definitions, so I need to go back through and study this domain again for these definitions. Perfect. And you kind of got your little schedule going there for that. So write down definitions to review. All right. Next up is going to be lab it up after you study. So, and I mentioned this before, labbing is fun, right? You actually get to have hands on and put two things together, and then boom, you make light. Uh, that's just a joke. It's, when you're in school and they have you create light from the energy of a potato. that whole thing. The first time you do something really interesting like that in a science class, it's like your aha moment, like I could do this. Like, oh my gosh, like all the stuff I've been learning up until now, I could use it in practice. It's like that exciting moment for you. So that's why I want you to not get ahead of yourself. You can lab, which is great, but don't lab until after you study. So in here, you go through your 30 minutes of lecture. Oh, it's so boring. But guess what? You get to do a fun little lab afterward. You get to install an RPM package and then a Debian package and then compiling this from source. And then you get into really fun stuff later on. But that's going to be the exciting part, is where you actually get to learn and or do the things you just learned. So give leave it as like kind of like a little reward for yourself, like, oh man, I just did all this strenuous studying, so now I get to lab afterward and put it to use. So that's why I say, leave lab it up for after you're done with your studies. And then next, back to your planner, give yourself a deadline. So I did mention that I would, kind of come back to this. Give yourself a deadline. So let's say you go through, you wouldn't do this, right? Because, using multiple sources of studying, I've mentioned that in here, and I've also mentioned that in other videos. But let's say hypothetically, because this is an essentials certification, so it's like their AWS cloud practitioner. It's one of the more basic certifications for this particular vendor, LPI. So let's say 26 hours is an adequate amount of time. So you're going to have at least 2 hours of studying every single day, and then you count for 5 days out of the week. Let's say you don't know if you're going to study on the weekends. You should, but you don't know for sure. You want to have a good time, so you're going to account for 5 days of the week, divide 26 hours by 2, or divide your 26 hours by 5, and then that's going to be how many weeks you're going to have, and then give yourself a deadline, and then you say, okay, I'm going to give myself a week after that time, as kind of like a lead way for just studying practice tests over and over again, and that's going to be that week. But then before you even start the studying, or maybe after you start the studying, to make sure you actually want to get the certification, you give yourself a deadline in the planner. Not only that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks into studying, you schedule the test. Now you have to. You made a financial commitment to yourself that you have to actually go through with this. So, there's no going back now. I know this has been hammered by everyone else, and any of these like study material. If you go to A Cloud Guru and you're studying for the Solutions Architect Associate, you're going to hear these same words. But it's true. If you do that, if you give yourself a deadline before you study, in your calendar, give yourself a deadline. 2 weeks, 3 weeks into actually studying, you give yourself another deadline by putting that financial burden on yourself and scheduling the test. This way, you are for sure committed, and you are going to go through with it, and you're not going to slack off, and you're going to actually study it and learn it and do it the right way. I did bring up this. I just want to mention, the whole labbing it up. Labbing it up is great. Different vendors have different tiers sometimes, and this is one of them. But I do love A Cloud Guru because, sorry about that, the actual labs are included into the standard plan. So even if you get the bare basics, you still get the labs, you still get the study material, you still get the practice tests. That's all included, which is fine and dandy. But I do love extra bits in their certification platform, which is their playground. You could spin up different servers. So you could, I think it's up to 6. It depends. They have a different way of tier of doing this, but I think it's like about up to 6 different instances. Uh, I was trying to set up different like nodes and have the nodes communicate with each other. Uh, and I think, and that was different Docker nodes, but that's for another time. uh, that's for another certification. We'll get into that later. Um, but you could set up different nodes, different terminals, or like you can play with a lot with their playground as they call it, and then they have their sandbox environments. So let's say you're labbing, studying for an AWS or an Azure or GCP certification. You get all the free resources for the first year, right? And that's great. But you forgot to turn something off. It was something that wasn't really expensive, but there's $3 you didn't mean to spend. Like, wait, where did I get this bill for $3? Oh yeah, I forgot to turn this off. And that is a learning experience. Don't get me wrong. It's great because you will never forget to turn that off again because it cost you $3 on something you weren't actually using. But if you don't have the bandwidth to pay that extra $3 right now, then having something like this where you could have access to their sandbox, where you could spin up a sandbox environment, and then you could have a virtualized version of Amazon, and then when you're done with it, you just close the browser and everything automatically turns off and you're not paying for anything. That's a great positive. So that's why I did just want to mention that. And no, I'm not getting paid by A Cloud Guru. And A Cloud Guru does not actually have an affiliate program. So I can't get paid by them even if I wanted to. But I do love that about their platform. And I just wanted to mention that, when you're studying for labs, use as many resources as you can, and it's really going to help you go above and beyond because you're studying the material, you're learning the objectives for each domain, and then you're instilling that information in your brain with using hands-on labs and actually having your hands on the material. So that is our last study tip. Those are my tips. These are some of my resources. I will leave them in the video description. It's for Apple iOS, for Android, for desktop, for whatever you need. It's for that. So I just want to make sure anyone and everyone, no matter what hardware you're using, you have a way to ingest this information and to be prepared come test day and actually follow through with yourself and take the test. I hope you found this helpful. If you're like, Dalton, I already do all this, great. Guess what? You're probably going to pass the next test. If I even helped you find one thing that you didn't know how to do, then I've made I've come done what I've set out to do, which is help make sure you're prepared to take your next test and ace that test. Well, this has been Dalton and Cloud. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give the video a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.